So this is going to be probably a slightly longer video than some of them. What I want to do is give you everything you need to know to do a graphic user interface, which means like a window in Python, using Python. Python is a really old language, and so it doesn't really expect to use graphic user interfaces. As you know, it tends to use text as the way of inputting information. But a suite of programs called Tkinter was written, which gives you the facility to make a window and put objects onto it. So, if you're going to use graphic user interface, what you need to do is you need to make objects, and then you have to place them on the graphic user interface on the window, and then you have to use them with a function. So, making the object. First of all, what you have to do is you have to import everything, that's what the asterisk means, from Tkinter. That's Tkinter, Tkinter. That means bring every program in that suite of programs. The next thing you need to do is you have to name a variable which you will associate with the TK. That is the part that actually makes the window itself. In this video and from here on, I'm using a variable which I've called outer GUI shell to give it a meaningful name. Unfortunately, earlier on things that I have recorded have used a variable which I called name, which was terrible. But from here on in, on these ones, this shell will be called outer GUI shell. So I'm putting that property, that capability from Tkinter or Tkinter into a variable. And the next thing that I need to do is I need to place objects on my graphic user interface. So you can see that here in my program, and I've pulled that out for this presentation. So what we have is we can have a button which you press, a go button, like an OK button or a cancel button. You can have labels. Labels are where you can put text, but the user can't input anything, it just gives them information. Entry boxes, what we might call text box in another programming language. Perhaps check boxes, where you can choose certain options, or radio buttons. And what we have to do then is we name a variable. We tell it what object it's going to have. We then tell it where on the which screen, which graphic user interface shell it's going to be placed on. So here they are all on the outer GUI shell, so they're all going to be on that main window. Other what's called parameters, those means options, are do you have any text you want to display in there? Pad X and Pad Y makes space between the writing and the end of the box, otherwise it just makes it the size it needs to be. You can colour it with a foreground colour and a background colour, and for text boxes, for example, you can tell it the length that you want it to be as a width. Then what you need to do is you need to place each of those objects onto the GUI. Until you place it onto the GUI, it exists, but it won't ever be seen by the user. You can put that as an extra command on the end of the definition. So I could, for example, here, I can put it like that if I want to. But for here, I am going to use it as a separate line of command so that we can see where it's going to be. I quite like grid. Pack is supposed to be easier. Pack just shoves it in the next free space. I quite like grid because I then, if I do a little bit of planning ahead of time, I can decide which row, which column things are going to go into. Note a row is as wide as it needs to be to hold an object. So sometimes a space in a row can be very small for a small object, or it can be very large if you've made a long entry box, for example. So how do we use objects? So here's a little important detail. You'll notice that so far I've talked about top, so we import everything from Tkinter. We define an outer space, a window, and we give it a name. We define our objects, and for each object we place, we give it a variable name, a unique variable name, and tell it which window it's going to be in. We only have one window here. And I've shown how to place those on the screen. That does nothing at the moment. It will show. Let me show you it working. Hold on. I just had 2 full stops. So I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so we have here, here's our big button with the padding, just to show you how padding works. With the colours, the terrible colours, but the foreground colour and the background colour. We have our label. User can't do anything with that. We have a text box, and we've actually put some text in the text box. That's what this insert bit does here. In fact, I believe it would do that anyway here. And I've placed them in different places because there is only a row 0 and row 5. Row 0 is here, row 5 comes right next to it. Sorry, row 0, row 5 going across. Oh dear. Sorry, that was my fire alarm. So you can see here we've defined where everything is so far. What we're going to do for the last part of this is we're going to create a function. Just close this down here. We're going to create a function. And programs generally run as functions, so they're mini programs that run only when a defined event happens. So there's a little loop going to happen here. Graphic user interfaces are event driven. The objects are drawn, they're defined and drawn, but they are pointless unless you have this function ready to capture the content, the input or the outcome of an event. We're going to look later at a special pre-written function called lambda, which is used for buttons and radio buttons and check buttons. But we will come to that later. So our function that we're creating, we name a new word. Here it's myClick. Notice the 2 brackets and the colon after it. So we define, that should be a lowercase d, the variable name, bracket, bracket, colon. Everything following that is indented. Everything in as part of the instructions of myClick, note those are all indented. That's how Python knows that these instructions belong to this function here. And what we then have to remember if we are doing this is we have to make it hold and loop over and over and over and over, And we do that with that simple single line at the end, and that's saying this this shell, this window, loop around, just loop, just loop, just loop, just loop, just loop. Because otherwise it will only run once, and when you press anything it won't do anything, it's finished. So it has to hold on. The loop that's going to happen here is we use the get command. So what will happen is when this function happens, it will, what will it do? It makes, this is a random one, it makes a new variable and it puts into that the word hello and the value that it gets from the entry box. It makes a new label, it gives it colour, and it puts message, that made up message, into that label. And of course, when does this happen? Let me just check. When does this happen? This happens when the event click happens on that button. So a little bit of a backward loop here. What's going to happen is we tell it that if an event happens to the button, go to my click. When my click is called, the first thing it does is it goes and gets the content of the entry box, and then it adds that to the word hello, and then it makes a label. So it's a little backward loop. So let me show you that running now. So what I'm going to do, I can type in a word, I can type in my name. It does say click here, although it's hard to see. When I click, that will cause this command to set off looking for my click. My click will begin. It will make a new variable, which is the word hello, and the value entered into the entry box. It will make a new label and put that variable, the content of that variable, into the label, and then it will place that label down. So let me show you. There. Can't see it very well at all, but that says hello Siobhan. And there's a video there for you to watch if you're using the PowerPoint. So, next of all, not quite sure why I've questions. So my next part is that I'm going to show you how to use check buttons and radio buttons. Okay, so we're talking about, again, how do we get input from the user for a graphic user interface. So before I talk you through this program, very similar to the previous one in that we have defined two radio buttons which we have given unique names to. We've made a label as well. We're going to draw those three onto the outer shell, onto the graphic user interface. We're going to draw them here now. We define where they go, and here is our instruction, what should happen when the user triggers an event. I've got a little bit more to talk you through with this though. So radio buttons and check buttons, they vary slightly. A check button, I've put two examples here. A check button is more like you would think of with toppings on a pizza. If you had an app to make toppings for a pizza, then a check button lets you choose as many of the buttons as you want. You could have extra cheese and extra pineapple and extra jalapeno peppers. Can you see that? Whereas radio buttons, you can only choose one of the set. If one is chosen, the other is by default switched off. One is on, one is off. So I think of that more like something like pizza base size. You can only have small or medium or large. You can't have all of those. So my example here is going to be using a radio buttons. So let me talk you through how to collect and use the input from the radio button. So there's an extra feature here. With checkboxes and radio buttons, you need to define a variable that will be set for each of the objects. Now, if you are using checkboxes, then you would probably use a separate variable for each of the checkboxes, because you need to know whether checkbox 1 is true or false, and whether checkbox 2 is true or false, and whether checkbox 3 is true or false. However, for a radio button, which I've got in this example, you would probably only choose one variable shared between the two. And as an extra kind of little feature, so I've just done var4 equals int var, integer var, they're special variables for graphic user interface. You also have the facility to set a value. You can do that with a lot of the objects that you can create as well. So I have said that as it starts, give it value 2. And if I look here, that means that button 2 will be the one that is pressed in, switched on, selected. So, just as with our text box, our labels, our buttons, what do we do to define it? We need to make a variable, a unique variable name, and then we tell it what will be in that variable. And here we have a radio button. We tell it use a radio button. We tell it where it should be placed, what object it should be placed in. Here we go, the outage, the main shell. We can give it some text. We tell it which variable to link to. We tell it what value it should have. So this takes value 1, this takes value 2. Then what we also are doing is we are telling it, just like in our program 1, we had command here, which was a simple call over to our function. In this case, it's just a little bit more complicated. The reason it's a little more complicated is that here we have to take across I've actually called it value, a number, a response from the calling that from the action that the user has taken. So you'll note, let me put these two together, you'll note here that with the button being pressed, just a normal big red OK type button, the command is go start off my click, and you'll notice that those brackets are empty. The brackets tell it it's a function, but it's saying I'm not going to carry any value across for you. We find that as we run that here. However, in our radio button version, notice the function here takes across and collects and then uses something, a value. And that is coming from here, and that asks us to use a slightly more complex instruction. If you compare this line, command equals lambda colon button clicked var4 get bracket bracket. So here we are calling button clicked. We are going to get the value variable for value get and send that into our function. So that this loop is slightly more complex. Notice that this function has something fed into it, this one doesn't, and that is fed into it is whatever it has read as whatever var4 value is. And again, I've just placed these two radio buttons down. So if I show you, explain again, what's happening, the variable name get collects the value of the variable of whatever button or box is selected. That then it calls, when the function is called, it gives an internal name to the value, the variable that's passed in, calls it value. Within the function, it uses this variable as you would use any other. I am just using it to show the value. You could use an if, elif. Let me show you this program running. Here we are. It's so tiny I can't move it because there's no space for moving it. So notice var4 set to value 2. Value 2 is radio 2, so that is the one that is set. That is the button that is true. Let me just run this again. Let me run this again and make that 1. You see now it's set as the first button, the one that's value 1, because I've told it to be value 1. So we make a variable, we set it to value 1. If we use it at any time, spoiler alert, we use it here, 1 will be its first value. We create 2 buttons. One of them says pound, one of them says dollar, and a label, and that shows us the value. We place them down on the screen. Row 1, they're both in row 4. And the label, button 1, button 2, label. If I click each one, what's happening, I'll tell you what's happening. As I click the radio button, it is taking the value of variable 4, it is carrying that into here, it is drawing the label and putting the value into it, and then it is placing that on the screen. I'm just going to make a little change and show you that. Hold on. So I've just had a little play, and I'm just going to show you a little change I could do. So here again we're taking in the value when the button is pressed. Get whatever value, whether it's button 1 or 1, 2, take that into the function, and then at the minute it's displaying that number. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a little bit more so that you know what you could do with things. So perhaps what I could do is I could do an if instruction. Remember, it has to be in set. So what I'm going to do, how many little runs I had. So I'm going to say, ooh. Right, I'm going to check the value of value. If value is equal to, now remember when it's a comparison, it's 2 equals sign. It's a number, so I just have to type the number. It's not words, so I don't have to put it in quotes. I need to put a colon. Here's what I will do. If value is equal to 1, if the value that's been passed in, i.e. if the first button was pressed, I'm making a new variable, message to user equals. Now here I will use quotes because these words will stay the same. Have a nice day. You pressed button and I'll concatenate value. But value is numeric. If I try running that now, it will crash because it can't add an integer to a text message. So I have to turn that the string value of value. Else, if it's anything else, I could be sensible and do an elif and then an else. Message to user equals what a terrible day. You pressed button. And again, string value of the value. And then what I want to do, instead of showing the number that's typed in, when someone clicks on the button, I want to show the whole of this. Message to user. Let's try that. Oh. Colon. Colon. Okay, so what should happen now is, what a terrible day, you press button 2. Have a nice day, you press button 1. Now I think what's happening is it's adding extra values on, I'm not quite sure. Oh, of course it's it's overwriting it, but one of the messages is slightly shorter, and it's leaving the old message behind, it's not particularly well behaved. That's okay. So that's a way of taking in a value from the button, using it in a function, using lambda, command equals lambda colon function name, and then input the get function of the variable you want. And then here what I've done is I have used that number, that thing that's come in, I've compared it to a certain value, in this case 1. If it's equal to the same as 1, make this message, message to user, make that message, otherwise message to user is this, and now show message to user. That's not as long as I thought it might be. I think that gives you all you need to be going on. Just as a last thing, here is the program I was working on. I can't unfortunately show this, but this is me using all of the things that I've learnt. So at the top I have a button, a label and an entry field, and I have my function which will, when the button is pressed, will give out a little message. Then we come down to some checkboxes. Now I've not used these checkboxes. I've written a variable. I've also actually used a frame, a label frame, which I've called frame 1, and I've put my buttons inside that just out of interest because I can. Then I've drawn my buttons and labels and things. Then I've drawn my checkboxes. And then down here we have me making radio buttons, placing the radio buttons and a label on the sheet, on the window, and then the function. So let me just show you that together. So this is a whole mishmash of things. Here, can you see I'm just playing with where I could put things here. Look, I can have one or both. That's why it's important that they have different variables. Here I have the values, and as my original button program worked, it's just showing that value here. And here, if I type in a name, and press that, it gives my little message. So that's all of those together. Beware, at the very bottom here is that main loop. I did want to get that all on one screen, but I can't. So I'll see if I can put that somewhere for you. Let me just get rid of this text. So finally I've shrunk this down so the whole of this sampler program, if you like, is on the screen. You call everything from Tkinter, you import everything, you draw a window. You define a button and label, and then later on you place those on the screen. You make 3 variables for 3 checkboxes. You make the checkboxes. 2 of them are in a frame and 1 of them is on the main page, and you place those frame and checkboxes. You make another variable, and you use it for the radio buttons and labels which you place on the screen. The program will loop continuously. It loops over and over and over, waiting for events to happen. The two things that could happen are that you could press the main button, and when you do, it sets off the function you've created, and it will go off, it will get a value from somewhere, in this case from the entry one from the text box, and in this case it's going to put that with something else and then display that message in a label. Or down here with our radio buttons, we have a special command using lambda, and lambda will collect the variable for value. It goes to get the variable for value, whatever it is, when one of the buttons is pressed. It puts that into this function, and then it here it will just display that number onto a new label. And that shows you everything of how this program, I think that's pretty much what you need for using a graphic user interface to really get you started.